All right, it started.
Okay, great, thank you. Hi, welcome everyone to our Practitioner Forum today. We're doing a best practice session on the Service Catalog for this week's session. I'll be your host for today, Dean Clayton from the SMA Technical Success Team, and I'll be joined hopefully really well. So agenda for today, so we're going to do a quick overview again, as we always do, about what these sessions are about. We're going to focus on the Service Catalog, so I've got a lesson to get through. Those that know me really well know that I talk way too much, so we'll go through that as best we can. Then I've set up some configuration use cases, various increasing complexity for us to go through. And then we'll do a little bit of a wrap up at the end, talk about obviously next steps, and gather a little bit of feedback. In regards to, because obviously there's quite a bit of content like last time, if there's any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and obviously myself or Carl will pick them up at some point during the session. Alternatively, you're always happy to email us after questions about what we do. Okay, so just to cover off about our best practice sessions, so really what we're trying to do here is provide guidance on what comes with the out-of-the-box processes and tool capability. So you understand how the tool's set up, how it's designed to work, and how then you can potentially utilize that with your implementations. As part of that, obviously, we want to achieve a common understanding of the principles and terminology. So, what do we mean when we talk about a catalog offering? What do we mean when we talk about service definitions, etc.? And then that also helps us all be on the same, start to go through some of those use cases. And really, it's all about making sure you get the best and the most out of the suite and out of our tooling. And finally, really, it's all we want to share the use cases. So again, not just a bit of a theory where we talk through stuff, but we've got some real life examples that we've done with customers that we want to share. And obviously, as we go through it, we'll provide some best practice recommendations of things and how to set it up. And obviously, on that point of sharing use cases, I'll mention it again at the end, but we're also looking to hear back from you guys of use cases that you've got that maybe you want to share with a wider community. Okay, so let's get down and talk about the Service Catalog. So when we talk about the Service Catalog, I think a lot of people always think about it, about that end user portal and about what an end user sees when they go to our self-service portal and want to start on there looking to either consume services or looking for support from the organisation. But that's obviously just one component when we talk about the Service Catalog. So at that highest level, a lot of what see when they first reach the service portal are the categories. And those are those big squares with the current design of our portal that a user sees when they see in a multitude of colours and different text and images. Those obviously categories then break down in a hierarchical structure into other elements below that and down to the actual offerings for each of the services. But those categories might also be hyperlinks out to other intranet sites maybe or community forums, useful information that an end user can consume. One thing that I always say when I've spoken with customers about an implementation is you've got to think of those categories. That's the first time that an end user is going to come across the service portal and the service catalog itself. So don't think of it purely from an IT perspective. Think about it how that end user is going to initiate that conversation and try to understand how to find what they're looking for. So don't try and align it all to say have all the IT under one category and maybe HR under another, and maybe other business areas. It's always good to kind of mix those in, because actually with the way that the different subcategories and everything work, you can do that quite easily. So in that example with the screenshot I got there, where I've got human resources, actually some of that may be requesting a name change because someone's got married, but also at the same time it could be a new employee request, which could include technical pieces as part of it, maybe access to accounts, maybe delivering a laptop or mobile phone as part of a new employee bundle. So just think about it from that perspective. Underneath those categories, we then get into our service definitions. So our service definitions are really the way that we obviously group our various services that are delivered by the business. And actually, as part of those service definitions, you know, they're actually more commonly aligned with when we talk about SACM, so Service Asset Configuration Management, or CMDB, as some people do, and tends to be the business services that IT support. From a point of view of the end user catalog, you know, you can have many services underneath the category, and likewise, not just offerings in the catalog, but also news and knowledge articles could be linked to those services. Obviously, we're not going to talk about knowledge management today. We'll save that for another session. But in regards to those offerings, if we click on the offering section in the portal, you'll get a drop-down list of those various services for you to then subcategorize and look if you wanted to browse. You'll also notice that
Oh, I think I lost your audio, Dean. Sorry, I think we lost Dean temporarily.
the offerings are the elements that customers are obviously more keen, you know, the things they're actually going to consume and what they're going to order. When anyone orders from the catalog, okay, hold on one moment. Looks like the presentation isn't running. Okay, let's carry on now that we're sharing again. Okay, so the service catalog offerings that we have within the portal, they break down as three different types. So we either have the IT service offerings, IT support offerings, or HR support offerings. And those offerings will actually then obviously generate an appropriate request of a similar type when that is ordered. Obviously, that's just the main request from that offering, because depending on how you set up your offerings in the catalog, it could actually spawn multiple requests, be that child requests as part of a bundle of different types. So that's from an end user perspective. When we look at it from the other side and we're talking about administration of the service catalog, there's 5 sections to the service catalog. Categories, service definition, offerings all have their own menu where you can have a list view of the various elements and search between them. We also have something called fulfillment plans, which I'll talk about on the next slide. But we also have the main catalog administration, which gives you a hierarchical view, as seen in the screenshot, to allow us to drill down through the category of the service and the offering, but also select and edit any one of those at that particular point. The other thing to note as well is that those service definitions actually are available also from the service portfolio management menu item, main menu. Okay, so we talk about those components, and let's do a little bit of dive on some of these before we go into the main one, the offerings. So the categories, obviously you've got the basic information about it, but you can also define, the look, the colours, the logo that's used on it. Maybe there might be even a picture that you want to use in the background. You can also set the display order over all of those, and obviously potentially make it a link out to an external site. The other thing that we have are entitlement rules, so you can use that to basically see who can see either that category and anything below it. We're not going to talk about entitlement rules today, but I think it's one of those topics that's a good thing to do its own session on at a later date. Okay, the other thing to note with those categories is they're only visible if they have valid offerings or articles below them within the hierarchical structure. Otherwise, they won't appear on that portal. Next level down are those service definitions. Because they're part of the CMDB, it has its own workflow. So you do need to make sure that it's either in the operate or decommission phase for it to be classed as an active service definition, and therefore any offerings underneath that be visible in the service portal. Because it's part of, obviously, the CMDB, there's lots of other data that you can store on it, including its relationships with devices and components. But in regards to the actual service portal, again, you've got entitlement rules and also separate descriptive text that's displayed on the actual portal as you go into each of the different sections. Third level down, we've got our offerings. So I'm going to go into more detail on each of these individual areas over the next few slides. But as we said, we've got the 3 types: IT service, IT support, and HR support. Again, those names are linked to the names of the request records. So if you do decide to drop IT from service and support, you can obviously do the same with how they're labelled in the offerings as well. There's lots of different data that you can set on offerings. With those ones I've kind of listed some of the main ones that people kind of tend to use. So the actual task plans, default values, any business rules specific for the offerings, whether it's a bundle and it generates multiple requests off an individual offering in the catalog. Likewise, you've got subscription and pricing information, or also your service level measures against it. The final level that we've got is our fulfillment plan. So this is like a standardized model that you can use that could be applied to multiple offerings. So with that though, the only thing that's actually stored against it are the actual task plans or any user options, those custom fields for that particular offering can be stored on the fulfillment plan. So if you had an offering and you wanted to create a fulfillment plan from that, those bits will come across, but all the other elements like the business rules, the default values, maybe subscription and pricing information, won't be copied across. Likewise, in the reverse, if you created a new offering and you applied a fulfillment plan to it, you'll only see the tasks and the user options set up on that. For me, I think fulfillment plans are quite a good way to have kind of a way to kind of store sort of the development of some of your offerings in the catalog. So if we take an approach of kind of say you're building out your catalog maybe for your first implementation, and some of your offerings in your catalog, maybe say like a new user request, it might be quite basic with the initial implementation. It may be say a run of 6 manual tasks and maybe a small approval plan. Over time, you might want to change that and update it. So what's always kind of quite good is if you copy when you want to change an offering, is copy the content of that offering into a fulfillment plan. Utilize that to create a new one to work on and modify. Then save that as the new fulfillment plan, and then reapply the updated fulfillment plan onto your offering in the catalog. It also, of course, means you've always got that as a snapshot, so you can always go back if after you've rolled it out there are a few issues and you need to go back to a previous version. So if we dive into the Service Catalog offering and some of the data that you can store and features and functions of it, if we look at, obviously, we'll go by the different tabs. So if we look at the General tab, there's quite a lot of data, usual kind of things, description and what have you. But some of the key things that we have there, so if we think about the status, active, internal, and inactive. So active means it's visible on the end user portal. Internal means it's selected by an agent who wants to apply an offering to a request, but isn't visible on the portal. And inactive is hidden in both those cases. Inactive is actually quite a useful one because if you're maybe building out a bundle of some sort and it's an offering that you don't want people to be able to select independently and you only want it to be launched from that bundle, you can store it as inactive and actually call it through the workflow. So it does allow you to utilize it in that case. Promotion is all about basically where it's going to appear in the order it will appear overall, and if it's set to recommended, that will also appear on that first featured page that you see on the inside a category on the portal. Action type drives obviously the subscriptions and the actions that's going to occur against subscriptions. To me, subscriptions is quite a huge topic, about mapping subscriptions to devices and to services. And actually, I think that's something to be better to do a bit of a deep dive into on its own. So I'm not really going to talk overly much about that. However, one of our use cases that we go through this afternoon gives an example of utilising subscriptions, so you can see that in action. Required asset information is quite a useful drop-down option because it allows you to potentially force a user to populate either a device or a service field on the request when they're generating it. So an example of that could be maybe they have a list of devices that they are the owner of. You could get it to make them select one of those as part of ordering from the catalog. Agreements, you've got obviously your service level targets or your operational level agreements that you set up against the delivery and everything else. In regards to audience, that's again driving the entitlement. So who can see the actual offering in the catalog. And then public audience is all about how that potentially offering and the request that's generated is shared. So it could be that it's set to private, so it's just only the user that's raised it can see it, but you might maybe set it to public. Let's say an example of a printer jam. If you've got a support offering, make it set so it's public, so when a request is raised against it, it's visible when people do a search. So if someone searches, oh, I've got a problem with my local printer, it could pop up in their searches and they could follow that request rather than generating a new request. One also thing to note at this point as well is there's actually the icons that we use on here and on the categories. They're actually available on a downloadable link from the Service Portal settings page. It's right at the bottom underneath where you set the actual design of the Service Portal and the colours and categories. And there's a nice pack of different icons you can use around the system.
And there was a question in the chat, Dean, about that.
Okay. Well, I didn't see the actual question.
Is the Service Catalog and Service Request Catalog functionality put together in one module?
Yes. Yes. Sorry, if I understood the question correctly. So all those items that we've talked about, they're obviously all in the Service Catalog Management module, and they all generate the service requests. Okay. From a point of view of our offerings, we then have our user options. So these are the custom fields that we would create as part of the offering. And in our use case, we'll show this a bit later on. So you've got various different types of fields that you can use at the moment. What I want to call out probably all those, and the one that I'm showing the picture on is our list type. You can create a custom list at that point with potentially up to 250 values, or you could take one of the lists that's available that's within the system under the administration. So you don't have to create your own if you've got one that's set out already. Personally, from an implementation point of view, one of the things that I've always done, which I think is always a good idea, is to probably set up a couple of standard generic lists that people could reuse. So maybe one with an equivalent of a Boolean, so maybe a yes/no, or maybe even a yes/no or other option, which people can then reuse those lists rather than having to create lists every time you want to create a new user option of that type. The question I just saw that's about, can we use request career change records? You can. It will generate a request first, but off the back of that request, you could certainly create a change record with a relationship with that request and pass various details that you need to it. Okay, the final thing I want to mention there is obviously the required flag. That's really setting up that field to be required straight from the beginning. Personally, I tend to prefer to do that as a way to use a business rule to manage whether a field is required, because you can put a bit more of condition around that. If you tick the box there, it's required as soon as it's created, where it might be that you want a field to be only required based on a value in another system, another field. I think, Carl, there was a question that popped up then.
Yeah, there was one about create validation for the user options.
Okay, so you can do, and we'll cover that a little bit further on. We have our thing that we refer to as expression language, which will show some examples of that as we go through this. Okay, the pricing tab. There's two sections to that: default and advanced. So default is really sort of the basic information, the pricing of the offering, maybe even whether there's a recurring price for it, be it a monthly or yearly cost, what have you, and also whether you want to make that visible to the end user. Likewise, you can add additional pricing based on the user options that you set. So the example that's in the screenshot there, we're saying if the price increases if they choose a high performance PC, and actually there's an increased price or a recurring price for a travel-friendly one. The other thing as well, with the Advanced tab, you can build in extra calculations as well based on the location of the user. So if you've got a global user base, maybe in different countries, and you want to show it in their local pricing, you can do that and show that with whatever calculation you want to use to generate the pricing between the different ones. The one thing to note around the pricing is pretty much that information is then passed onto the request. It doesn't really drive anything, but you can obviously certainly use it from a reporting perspective, and certainly some of our plans overall with the product will look to obviously increase the potential use around pricing. So if you've got a use case maybe where you want to utilise that information a bit more around pricing, I'd certainly recommend raising that as an idea on our community exchange, and put forward the enhancement request. The next tab that we have is the rules tab. So these are just like rules that you can set on the actual workflow of the individual record types, be that a request or a change or an incident. or any of the other record types. These ones are specifically for that offering, and when that offering is linked to a request record, and they run on that request record. Okay, so what that basically means is you can devolve some of the administration capabilities and things from the standard administration team that may be looking after the application to the Service Catalog team. So they can build out rules, be that validation rules or rendering form rules maybe, all from within the offering, and that will then get applied when someone goes to the catalog. They can be rules that appear as they're doing that ordering process, or even affect that request during its life cycle. The other thing to note is obviously you can specify when they run in comparison to the standard request run, rules, business rules, so they can either be run before or after. Most of the time I tend to set them as before. You know, I think it's in rare cases when you probably want to do it on either side if there's specific sort of chaining of rules that you want to set up. But also you can do it against obviously SLT related events. So you know, depending on the service level target, maybe send a notification to someone to say, can we do some more work or chase up this request. Couple of things to mention around that really is in the notes. So when you build out, when someone orders from the catalog and a request is created, whatever rules are set on the offering get included to that request for its life cycle. If you go and modify the offering in some way, maybe add some extra rules, they won't get applied to that any offerings that are currently existing, any requests that are currently existing. Okay, the rules on a request will only change if the offering is altered against that request. And out of the box, because of when the offering gets related to the request, it's normally during the creation, it's not something you can actually easily go back and change. Now, if you want to tailor the system, you could potentially do that, and I've certainly done that with some customers to give them the ability to kind of go back to the classify stage to change the offering value that's associated with a request. Default values tab really is all about obviously setting default values on the record. There's a standard set of fields, as you can see in the screenshot, that we include on there, and either you can set it to static values, so drop values that are from a drop down and what have you, or some sets of text, or dynamically. So in the example there, the service desk group, I set that in this particular default value to be whatever the support level 1 group is for the service that's applied to that particular request when it gets generated. Okay, and that's using our expression language there, an example of how it's done. And we'll probably do a couple of sessions where we'll, as part of this practitioner forum, where we'll look into building out business rules and using expression language and some of the more advanced features and capability. The other thing you can do is obviously set that against the user options, so they appear underneath on the lower part of that form. And if you want to add any other fields, so if you maybe modify your request and add some custom fields, and you want them to have set default values, obviously you could do that through business rules, or you can modify the specific form that's displayed at this point on the offering, so that you can go and add them in on any offering that you wanted to. Okay. I think when we get into the one of the real powerful parts of offerings is our task and approval plans. And most of the work that I've ever done around offerings and creating them is building out our actual fulfillment plans and how that request is going to be completed. The task plans, obviously, it's a graphical interface of the way that we've got it set up. So, compared to other tools where you're just manually adding in, it's like a list view of those tasks. You get a nice workflow of how those tasks are being created, and you can see where the tasks are in parallel or serial, and where the transitions from one task to another are. Task plans in request, it's different on each different record type in the system, but on request, there's only certain phases they can run on, and obviously that's dependent on the type of request it is. So in a service request, it's to fulfill all the review phases. Support requests, first line support, the escalate phase or the review phase, and the HR support workflow, the classify or the fulfill phases. And that's for those tasks. Within that, you've pretty much got a choice of either creating manual tasks, so the classic, a manual task to the application team to maybe install an application on a user's desktop. You can have automated tasks, so that's where you can trigger and run a business rule at that particular point in the workflow. We'll show that with some of our use cases. And then also decision trees and joins. So decision trees, kind of you can see there with the approval plan at the bottom, where you can basically have a condition which you can either set yes or true or false, or other ones, as we'll explain in the next slide, which allows you to then alter the way the run of the workflow is. In regards to approval plans, those obviously only apply to the approval phase of IT service requests. We also have them obviously on change, but we're only talking about requests there. So there's just that one phase that you can put the approval on. As part of that, though, you can have many approval tasks and decision trees, and obviously joins as well to help group things together. The key thing to note is if you wanted to have multiple sets of approval, you can do that. That's not a problem. So if we look at those approvals first, and just look at the options around that. So the first thing that you can do is you can set up the approval strategy. So the strategy, there's 5 different strategies, I have to count them, that you can utilize. So similar, it's exactly the same as what you would have on change. So the classic, everyone who is an approver has to approve. Everyone has to approve, but it's an immediate deny. So as soon as someone denies from a group of 5 that it's denied. Quorum, so it's waiting. So if you've got 5 people who approve, as soon as you get whichever gets 3 approvals or 3 denials, that's the result. 1 must approve. So if you've got a group of 3 or 4, as soon as one of those approves, it goes through. And then 1, I think, which tends to be used more for requests than anything else, is 1 must approve, immediate deny. So that's basically where you can have a group of people, maybe say like a business unit, or say, which could be 5, 10, 15 people that manage the approvals. But basically, the first person that goes in, they either approve or reject the approval and the appropriate request. In regards to the approval definition, so who are the people that can approve? Is you've got the choice of either setting an individual user. So in that example, I've put one of my senior managers in there as an approver, and select them from a drop-down list of all the people records. You can do the same with groups, or you can use the expression language to pull something off, something related to the request record, okay, that's being the parent record it's being run from. So in that example there, I'm getting the manager of whoever the requested for person is and bringing them in as an approver. The other thing you can do is you can do conditions. So you can set it up so that maybe that group or that person or that expression only triggers if there's a certain setting on the record. So in this example I've got there, I said if the urgency field is set to urgent, then at that point the accounting group gets added in to the approval definition. Okay. I mentioned about decision trees, so that allows us to do that. Split out the route that a workflow is going to go, be that on an approval or a task plan. In regards to decision trees, you normally have in case of that you need to a condition that you need to map against. There's 2 options. You can either do a yes/no, or you can do an advanced. Later on, I'll show in our use case. I'll show a sort of an advanced one. But the yes/no, it's basically, does that condition come out as true or false? So the example I said here is so one of the user options is select PC type is equal to high performance. So on that basis, if that is selected, then that will come back as true. So the yes route would be run out of that decision tree. If that came back as false, the no route would be on. The other thing to note with the advanced is there is a catch-all otherwise. So if you put a couple of conditions in and then so if, let's say you've got a drop-down value with 3 options of where you want to go, you could put a condition in for 2 of those, and then the third one will always be the catch-all. Okay. The other thing to note is on a decision tree, within a workflow, it has to flow somewhere. So you can't end with a yes, no, or maybe just have a route that comes off the yes. So you would have to do a join to whatever happens later on within the workflow. But it's fairly easy to do, and it will tell you if you've got a mistake in your workflow as you're building it before you try to save it. In regards to then the tasks that can happen in your fulfillment, so we have the task properties, and you set all those obviously as hard-coded values, or again use dynamic values. So it may be that you want to set things like the assignment group or the assignee of a task related to something to do who the assignee of the request is potentially. I'm not going to go through all the different business rules you can run. The help system has a lot of information there to show you those and lots of examples as well, which is quite useful. And we'll cover that a little bit in the use cases. The one thing I would say is in regard two things I want to mention. The first one is the task gets generated when it's reached within the workflow. So if you've got 5 tasks in serial and you go into that phase, the first task will be activated and created at that point, but the other 4 tasks won't be created. Okay, those 4 tasks will get created as soon as the previous task is completed. Saw a question pop up about OO flows. Yes, you can run OO flows just like you could in Service Anywhere from tasks, and that's actually a really good use case for utilising task plans. One of the common things that I've always done, and I always think is a really good thing to do, especially in the service request area, is at the end of your workflow, put a couple of tasks, either a set multiple fields rule, or maybe you want to separate them out as set field automated tasks, to populate everything that's needed to close the ticket off. Now, why would you do that at the end of the test plan? Well, it's to save time for the agent that's working on it. So if you think about a request, maybe I'll talk about the use case that I'm doing later on, which is about delivering a PC to a user. You might have a manual task to someone that they go and deliver that PC, and they come back to their desk and they'll close that task off. Everything else after that, you can automate. So you can basically say, okay, because that task has been completed successfully, we can automate and close the actual request off without the agent or the support agent actually going into the request and updating it. So as soon as they close that task, the whole request completes and it goes out to the end user for them to accept the request has been completed. Last thing that I want to talk about, and then we'll get to the use cases, is about fulfillment approaches. So one of the things that you find as you're starting to build out your catalogue, and I've seen this happen quite a lot when I've been working with customers, is day one when you're starting to do your first kind of build of it, people are starting to get used to the way the catalogue works and building out those fulfillment plans. It's quite common to say, well, I'll create an offering for each of the different things that we need to do. Maybe new PC, new starter, access to an application, etc. And they'll have all that's needed in that one task plan. But what tends to happen with that is you tend to have a situation where actually there's probably parts of that you want to reuse for other offerings. Now, you can make the request a little bit more generic and use things like the user options and what have you. But there's probably cases where also you might want to use that elsewhere. Similar to like a new starter, where you might want some kind of bundle of various activities that are going to different teams. So whilst doing it all in one request is you've got a pro of that because you can do it all and see it all in that flow. It does restrict some of the reporting options you've got on it. So as a new starter process, if we took that as an example, you wouldn't necessarily be able to capture all the information about how if there's ordering a user a PC as part of that process, how long that particular section took, or if there's issues with that. The other thing as well is if you have to modify that, you need to get all the teams involved to make sure that it gets set up correctly. And likewise, I see a lot of customers look to potentially partition off the service catalog administration to multiple people across different business units. So scheduling that and coordinating that can sometimes be a little bit of a pain. The next option, which is sort of there out of the box, is using bundles. So that allows you to basically, when you raise a request, and we think about that new starter, that it creates that parent request, and then creates a number of sub requests or child requests underneath that. The good advantage with that is it means that the parent request is obviously there until all the others are closed off. It doesn't get closed off itself, so the end user just sees that one request and see the high-level workflow. But also that means the individual requests can go off to the relevant business units, and they can be reported on, and you could potentially be a bit more complex in how they're delivered. It also means that if a particular business unit changes the way they work, maybe day one, everything's manual for ordering a PC, but 3 months later you've got some automation in there as part of it. You only have to modify that one sub offering rather than all of them to do it. One of the drawbacks with the way that the out of the box works on that is that all the requests kick off right at the beginning. So as soon as the parent request is created, all the others start at the same time. So what we then have is in essence our third option, which I've dubbed related requests, and that's basically taking the concept of a bundle and staggering it. So what we're basically saying is rather than those requests all starting at the beginning in the workflow, they're kicked off at various points within the workflow. So it might mean that you have 2 or 3 tasks that occur on that parent request, and then in that, maybe for a new starter, maybe, make sure that they've got a start date, make sure everything's done from a HR process perspective, and then generate a sub request to the Active Directory team to make sure they get an account set up in their environment. And then maybe have another request later on in the workflow to order their PC after we know that they started and joined the team. The good advantage is you get the benefits of the bundle, so the separate BUs can manage all the stuff, they can do the modifications on the individual offerings, and they can start when it's needed within the workflow. So you don't have a situation where requests are having to be put on pending because you're waiting on other requests to be completed first. Okay, if anyone wants to have a bit of a conversation about that one offline, I'm happy to have a discussion because it's quite a complex situation. One of the things, so we've done a lot of talking, a lot of information been passed, and we had a little bit of a stutter at the beginning. So in regards to further reading, so we've got the Application Help Centre. There's a link there which obviously takes you to the Service Catalog Management section where a lot of this information has been gathered from. But we've also got our Getting Started guide as well. So on the community forum, on the Learn site, we've got our PDF. Chapter 4 is all about the Service Catalog, but also Chapter 3 is a good read because that talks about service portfolio and about those service definitions and how maybe you want to set those up aligned to the way that your business works. Okay, so lots of talking, talked a lot of topics, a lot of listening. So now let's go and look at our use cases. As we talked about in our last session, we've kind of split our use cases into 3, crawl, walk and run. So crawl, we're looking at basically simple configuration, things that you can set up quite quickly, but it's a starting point for you to do a more complex use case. Walk is where we've got a little bit more effort that's involved, maybe some expression language to understand around it, and it also might need some configuration and data to actually implement it. And then run is where we get into the complex configurations. Okay, so it's a little bit more deep dive. Maybe the use case that we show would potentially need some changing to fit within your environment, and obviously you're probably going to want to do some testing around it as well as part of the configuration. So our first one is a crawl. So this one we're going to just basically look at creating an extra user option visible to an end user based on a previous input on a offering. So when the end user goes to the portal to order something, based on them selecting a value on the drop-down list, we give them an extra option to order an additional battery, which we might decide to have some extra workflow off the back of it. So let's run a quick video to show you how that would look from an end user perspective. So here we go. We're at the portal. And we're starting. For these, I'm just going to browse down, and we're going to request a new PC in this example. So the user gets obviously their details of the offering in the catalog, and they can read up on it. We've got the standard fields that they would have to fill out. So obviously business justification, and we've got a preferred method of contact. But in this case, we've got an additional user option of select PC. So in this case, and it's a mandatory field where we want them to select the preferred method of contact. The preferred PC we want. So in this case, we choose a travel friendly, and by doing so, that pops up an extra field for them to populate, seeing if they want an extra battery. Submit the request, and we're done. So how do we do that? Quite simple. So first, we go to our catalog and the offering that we want to put this on. From that point of view, we then obviously want to add those user options, those new fields onto that request. So here we've got two. So we've got select PC, which is you can see on the right-hand picture, drop-down list with two options. One thing I didn't mention before is whenever you create something custom like this, we always add an _C to show that it's a custom field or a custom value. We then create a second field of the extra battery, which is just a Boolean tick box. Then all we need to do is basically add a rule onto the record. So it's just a straight rendering rule, and you can see there we're basically saying, based on the condition, if the user option of select PC is not equal to the travel-friendly PC, then we hide the user option for the extra battery. So it's a bit of reverse logic in the thinking of that one, because we're hiding the field unless they select that travel-friendly option in the drop-down. Really simple. Okay, so our walk, approval based on a user option. So in this example, what we're going to look at is we're basically going to say, again, use the same offering in the catalog. Based on them selecting the choice of PC in that drop-down list, we're then going to determine whether it needs an approval. Okay, so if we choose, and an example we're going to run on this one, they choose a high performance, we're going to force them to get a line manager approval. So let's run the video again on this one. Okay, so again we go down to the request new PC. We go to the order it, and again exactly the same setup. We make the order. And this time we're going to create a travel friendly, but we're not going to order the extra battery, and we're going to submit that. Okay, and if we look at that request and we look at where that is in its life cycle, we can see that that's actually moved through to the fulfillment stage already. So it's already gone for someone to actually start working on ordering that. This time though, we're going to do exactly the same, but we're going to order a high performance PC. So again, we'll put our business justification in. My typing is a little bit slow today. And then from the select PC drop down, we're going to choose high performance. And again, you see we don't have that user option, but this time we're going to hit the submit and force that through. And this time when we look at that request, we can see it's actually sat in an approval request, but we'll just approve it at this point. You'll also note here we're showing the pricing to Tom, which the end user didn't see when he raised the order. And thanks, I appreciate Tom for approving that for me. And if we go back to my requests and we look at my requests in the system, we can see that the two requests now are both gone through to the fulfillment. And if we look at the high performance one, the detail on there, we can see that approval, and we've got that update that the manager Tom has approved it. Nice and straightforward. So we showed a little bit more feature functionality around that. So how do we do that? Well, exactly the same way that we've got those user options, just like before, but we're adding a little bit extra now. So we're adding in a workflow for the approval. So this probably isn't the most optimized way of doing it, and there's potentially a couple of different ways of doing it, but we'll walk through the way they'll set this up for the demo purposes. So first we've got a decision tree, and we basically say, depending on the condition that the user chose, so did they choose a high performance PC or not, whether we go yes or no. The second decision box is, have they got a line manager? So one of the things that I always think about when you're building out workflow, especially with approvals, is, you know, if you're reliant on data, it's always good to make sure you've got some kind of check to make sure that that data exists. Okay, so in this case, that is checking to see that I do have a manager against my person record. If I do, it goes to the manager approve. If it doesn't, it's going to a business unit approval. So we've got those two approvals set up. So the line manager approval is basically set as entity requested for person.manager, so the manager of the requested for person. And the business unit one is basically set as being a specific group. And again, so you've got that. Now you could obviously do them on the same approval definition with the condition set in there if need be. Finally, the last thing to do, as I mentioned before, we need to make sure those linkages are set up. So we create a join at the bottom, which we then all link those all up to together. So we've got the no from the previous decision tree, and obviously off the two approvals that we've got in that workflow. And that's it. Okay, so our final run work use case that we're going to go through is automate device allocation and ownership. So in this case, what we're doing is we're extending that offering that we've created, but what we're going to do is we're also going to identify an asset model based on the option that I select from that drop down, check to see if there's some that device is available in the stock room, reserve it, and then make the request to the owner of that device through the process. Now, in regards to this one, and when we go through the workflow, I sped it up and took some of the steps out to make it a little bit cleaner, but hopefully it should flow through quite nicely. So the first thing we do is we go and make that order just like we've done before. So let's go to order the new PC. And in this case, because I want to bypass that approval this time, I'm just going to put it through. I'm going to say we're going to order a travel PC. Okay, so we'll order a travel laptop, select the travel-friendly PC, and okay, and we're going to submit that. Now request is created. Now obviously that means we haven't had to go through the approval, and we're in the fulfillment stage. And we can see that we're there from where we are in the record right now. Okay. So from there, we want to look at it from an agent perspective now, I guess, which is the next step. So if we jump to an agent view and we go and look at our tasks that we've got to do for today, we can see I've got a couple of tasks associated with me. The top one there is prepare and deliver a PC related to the request that I've created, that I've just raised. Okay, so for speed purposes, we'll assume that we've gone and prepared it and I've delivered it to myself. So we'll just obviously close off that task. We'll mark it as complete, put a completion summary in there to be delivered, and we'll save that. We'll save that into the system. And that's closed off. And as you see, I've got no other tasks relating to that request. So that's all that's been completed for me as an agent. So I've only just had the one activity to do. Go back to my user, and I can see I've got a notification in the top right to say my request has been completed. So here, my request for new PC. Have a look on that, and we can see that there's been an update to say the PC has been delivered to me, and obviously I can accept or reject that. In this case, I'll accept it just so we can close off that ticket. So as an end user, I've gone in and I've only had some minimal interaction. From the agent perspective, again, I've only had a minimum amount of interaction. But if we go and look at it from an agent perspective and look at actually all the steps that's occurred on that record, so if we look at the actual task plan for that request, actually it's a lot more complicated. So there's a lot of other things that have gone on. So first, we've based on the user selection, we've determined and set the asset model that's needed for delivering the laptop. Then we've gone and attempted to automate that and reserve one from the stock room. We then had that manual task that I completed, and then we've closed off the reservation and updated and closed the ticket. So again, automated a lot of the steps for their actual request. So the only thing as an agent I needed to do is that one task that's allocated to me. You can see on the reservation that the particular reserved device, who it's been reserved for, and obviously it's been reserved for me, and that's been completed. So we've got details of that stored obviously on the request. And if I go back to the user view and look at the assets for the user from their menu, we go to service and assets. We can see the laptop now has been associated with me, and I can see the basic information about that laptop. So I can see the type, the serial number, and when the warranty date is. And also maybe if there's any sort of other requests specifically related to that, I can select them from there. So we've done that whole asset management aspect and relating it to the user, setting the owner, all as part of that workflow. And all that's happened from an agent perspective is one task has been needed to be done, and the rest has been automated. So it's a little bit more complicated, and there's lots of data elements around it, and I'm happy to talk about it, if there are questions offline or via the community forum afterwards. The key thing to note is, obviously, with this one, there's a lot of data that's needed in the background to help map that up. So we've got to have, obviously, asset models in the system. We've got to have stock rooms in the system and devices that are in stock in those stock rooms. We also then need to set a location against a person record and have the stock room set so they are set to be managed for users in certain locations. Again, there's a lot of information that helps us about setting that up, and if it's something that people are interested in, we can certainly do that as a deep dive in another session. Then from a point of view of the workflow and the offering, we want to build out the fulfillment plan. So there's the fulfillment plan split in two parts that we've just gone through. Okay, so let's look at those individual steps. So the first one is we've got that decision tree. And all that's really doing is basically, as we've done previously before, checking to see what is the user option that's been selected. Okay, and we've done an advanced style this time, and we basically said if the output value is travel friendly, it's one way, and if the output value is high performance, it's the other route. Then, based on that option, we've got two automated tasks. Okay, so those automated tasks then go and set the appropriate asset model on the request for the reservation process that we'll run in the next step. Okay. What we've then done is I've put a validation, an extra decision tree in to check that the asset model has been set on the record, and so that we can use that. Obviously, this is really sort of a bit of a belt and braces because of the way that we've done that decision tree, so it should be set without any problems. But what I've done is basically done a manual one, subject to if it hasn't been set, someone can manually set the asset on the request record. Okay, next step is we want to do the reservation of the PC. So one of the rules, there's an actual business rule that's only available through the request task process, fulfillment process, which you don't see elsewhere, and that's actually using the reservation. And that's a specific record type that basically goes and checks, based on the user's location, goes and checks to see if there is an appropriate asset record that we want to reserve for a user that's available in stock. You can also, as part of that, validate the warranty end date and also check allocate based on either the first in the door in the stock room or the last one that was put into the stock room. We then also have a decision tree after that to basically just do a check on that reservation and confirm that it's gone through successfully. In the case if it doesn't, we've got a manual task which would be allocated obviously to the support team to go and make sure, check the stock, maybe there's not a available asset in the stock room, or maybe there's they're from a different location that's not supported by the stock room. They can go and manually apply that to the request. And then we get down to the final steps. So then we get to our first manual task that we saw in the video, where we prepare and deliver the PC. Obviously, in the real world, that's probably not going to be one task. You might have multiple tasks associated with that. You may have also other things that are going on at the same time. In regards to then the closure, we want to close off the reservation properly to make sure that's closed off properly in the system, and then setting the solution and the completion code for the request so that request can move to the user acceptance right at the end. And that's it. Simple. Okay, so we've just gone over time slightly, so just a last couple of things. I know we had a bit of a funny start earlier on. So again, we've got the application help is available, obviously, for everything in the tool. There's some really good information there, as we said earlier on, about the Servic Catalog, and also the things, lots of example expression language for creating business rules. We've also got the community forums, which I'm sure some of you, that's how you found this the webinar, through the Learn ones, and obviously our idea exchange for enhancements requests to the product. And also on that Learn site, we've got our Getting Started and configuration guides, where there's some more detailed instructions of some of these things that we cover in these sessions. So finally, if there's any use cases that you'd like to share that you've got in the real world, we're really interested to have them. If it's a case of you would like to present it, we're happy to do that, or if you want to work with us and we'll present it for you, we're fine with that as well. You can't stop me from talking, so I'm happy to do it if needs be. So feel free to drop me an email, or Tanya or anyone else, and we'll look at organising that. Just a quick survey, just to see how we've got on today. So feel free to email me if it's easier. But if you can just do a kind of a quick, whether you're a 1A, 1B, then your current experience either with SMAX or with Service Anywhere. And then also a bit of feedback about today's session. So I'm pretty sure everyone should put a 3A rather than a 3B. But I understand one of the things with these sessions is we've got a wide range of different levels, so we're trying to accommodate for as many as possible. As we go forward, we're going to start to deep dive into some sections, and I'll mention them on. We're also interested to get some feedback on topics that we'd like you to put for future sessions. So if you want to look at a particular module, or maybe expression language, or other areas of the tool, we're really interested to find that out. As I say, either send me an email with those details, or put it in the chat window just to give some initial feedback. And then finally, our next session is scheduled for 2 weeks' time. So that's where we're going to have Tanya running our release readiness for the SMAX 2018-02 release. So giving you details about the new release that's coming out. The release is so that'll be really good. Some really cool stuff that's coming in as part of that. And then on the 28th of Feb, we've got our next practitioner forum, which is all going to be focused on the REST APIs. So whilst we've done a couple about the modules, which have been quite detailed, and probably for some of you as information you may already know and probably less learning, we're going to do a bit more of a deep dive on the REST APIs and how you can utilise that for updating and doing stuff with it and pulling back data within SMAX. And obviously these recordings, we'll make them available on the Learn site, on the community forum for you to watch and learn afterwards. Okay, so with all that, thank you very much for listening to me today, and hope you have a great day. Thank you.